Hello, everybody. It's Professor Fleming, and we're now on Lecture 2. This topic name, we're going to be talking more public awareness. We're going to talk about the public awareness of safety issues during the 1960s, which made crime and government priority and led to legislation to improve the criminal justice system. The civil rights and war protests, the war on crime, the Unbonus Crime Control and Safe Streets Acts of 1968. For introduction, citizens of the United States have held the right to free assembly and free speech, but rights guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution may be restricted when these rights harm others. The members of the National Socialist Movement have the right to public assembly, and the citizens of Toledo, Ohio, who have the right to express their disapproval of what the National Socialist Movement stands for. However, when citizens' actions become violent, authorities have the duty to stop the violence and protect the community. Regardless of the motivation for violence, those arrested will be processed by the criminal justice system, and if found guilty, will be punished for their actions. During the mid-1940s, the great starting point for the study of modern criminal justice system. Prior to World War II, the criminal justice system was dominated by political influences. There was little national attention focused on the criminal justice system. The federal agencies and federal governments were not significant players. The crime rate was generally low, and for the most part, any problems with the criminal justice system were perceived as problems concerning local administration, concerns, and reforms. Even immediately after World War II, the criminal justice system did not rise to national prominence. A decade of prosperity followed the end of World War II, and the crime and the criminal justice system were a little concern for the average citizens. For the most part, there was no academic departments for the criminal justices at colleges and universities. Thus, there was little interest or reward in studying the subject. Three phenomena stirred interest in the criminal justice system and led to its prominence as one of the most examined and criticized aspects of the government. 1. The Civil Rights Movement. 2. The Vietnam War. And 3. Rising crime rates and the public have increased awareness of the persuasiveness of crimes. Chapter 2. Civil Rights and War Protests. Protests against the institutional racism and U.S. involvement of the Vietnam War posed major challenges for the criminal justice system. Prior to the Civil War Act of 1964, businesses, hotels, restaurants, and public transportation could and did refuse service by impunity to citizens of color. For example, in 1956, the University of Alabama expelled its first black student, Arthurine Lucy, on the grounds that her presence was a threat to the public order. In the South, blacks were frequently the victims of lynching, violence, and denial of public and private services. In Cicero, Illinois, where Harvey Clark, a black war veteran, tried to take up a residence in an all-white town, a riot ensued. The building in which Clark was intended to live in was plundered while the police looked on. When citizens, both black and white, protested racial discrimination, they were often opposed by violence, even by death. By 1961, when civil rights workers attempted to desegregate the bus stations and waiting rooms, the bus in which they were traveling was firebombed and the demonstrators were beaten. NAACP leader Margaret Evans was murdered, and due to the complexity of the police and the crime, it took decades to bring his killer to justice. Civil rights protesters often feared not only by the violence of the mob, but also by its local law enforcement. During that time, Rosa Parks, in an act of civil disobedience, challenged local laws that denied black equal rights to the use of public transportation. Her arrest initiated a boycott of public transportation, result in interrogation of public transportation itself. At times, the criminal justice system did not distinguish between criminal justice and social justice, resulting in both civil disobedience and violence. Civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. promoted the tactical of civil disobedience, which also challenges the criminal justice system. King said, and I quote, "I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and unwillingly accepts the penalty by staying in jail to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice. It is in reality expressing a very high respect for law." One of the most well-known examples of civil disobedience occurred in 1955, once again, when Rosa Parks refused to move to the rear of the bus as required by law and was arrested. Although King advocated for nonviolence, there were many who rioted. Rioted during the 1960s caused millions of dollars in property damage, the injury of thousands of people, and death by the dozens. Political protests against U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War also generated many conflicts in which the police often were captured on film engaging in brutal, grotesque acts against many of the protesters. During the war on crime, during 1965, President Lyndon Johnson declared a war on crime. He authorized a series of federal presidential commissions to study crime and justice in the United States and to recommend suggested reforms to restore public confidence. A study in the criminal justice system with the eye on reform was a great challenge, and many people thought the task impossible. The American Bar Association declared that the criminal justice system in America was, in reality, a non-system. The findings of the President Crime Commission concluded that the fear of crime had eroded the basic equality of life by many Americans. It also recognized the importance of the crime prevention as opposed to crime fighting and the necessity of eliminate injustices in the criminal justice system. To win the war on crime, the commission called for the development of a broad range of services in response to crime problems. Strategies to attract better quality personnel at all levels of the criminal justice system, research into the problems of crime and criminal administration, greater resources at all levels of the system, and a much greater community and civil involvement in general. In response to the recommendations of the President's Crime Commission and demands for the public, substantial resources were added to the criminal justice system. For example, to attract better qualified personnel, the police had to increase salaries. As a result, police costs skyrocketed to major cities. It helped to defray these costs. Local and state governments sought assistance from the federal government, whose response was to pass the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Acts of 1968. This act is a watershed in criminal justice history in the United States. As a part of the origin from which major changes in the criminal justice system were derived, the Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968 attempted to counter restrictions imposed on law enforcement by the U.S. Supreme Court. It also created a Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, better known as the LEAA, and the Law Enforcement Educational Program, other words known as LEAP, LEEP. The LEAA attempted as a conduct for transfer of federal funds to the state and local enforcement agencies. However, these funds were not without strings. The goal of the LEEP Association was to promote educational against criminal justice personnel. The program was directly responsible for drastic increases in the education of police officers. The LEAP grants and the loans paid the tuitions for the criminal justice personnel other than attorneys only, and students who promised to enter criminal justice after graduation other than such as attorneys only. The impact of the funding was significant. In 1966, there were 184 programs offering criminology or criminal justice courses. By 1978, that figure rose over 1,000 colleges and universities offering degrees ranging from associate to doctoral levels. At its peak to 1975, LEAP funded the education of 100,000 students and spent more than $40 million on criminal justice program education alone. At the massive amounts of federal assistance, numerous reform efforts, and adoption to the innovative strategies by the police, courts, and corrections, public confidence in the criminal justice system was restored and the crime rate dropped. People felt safe to go out into the public again. Residents of large cities reported that they felt safe using public transportation. Violent crime rates from nearly all categories dropped. Local and state governments found equilibrium in funding the criminal justice system and the other needs of the government. Things were looking up for the public confidence in the criminal justice system until September 11th, 2001. One of the principles of the United States was founded and expressed by John Lackey, Thomas Jefferson, John Stuart Mill, and the Bill of Rights was that citizens had certain unalienable rights or rights that cannot be taken away from them, even if citizens consent on losing their rights. One of the most basic of these rights was the right of freedom of speech guaranteed by the First Amendment. However, the Supreme Court has ruled that this right has been restricted when the exercise of the right causes harms to others. A wave of patriotism following the 9/11 attacks have resulted in several bills to amend the Constitution to prohibit flag burning.